The impossible victory. How a forgotten prince destroyed the Sultan's invincible army. January 10, 1475. The snow-covered fields of Moldavia were about to witness one of history's most shocking military upsets, a battle so devastating that it would send shockwaves through the Ottoman Empire and change the course of Eastern European history forever.
It's a setup.
David versus Goliath on steroids. Picture this. You're outnumbered 5-1 by the most feared military machine of the 15th century. Your enemy commands an army of 120,000 battle-hardened warriors, including the elite Janissaries who have conquered Constantinople and terrorized Europe. You have 40,000 men, mostly peasants and minor nobles from a backwater principality that most Europeans couldn't find on a map. Logic says you're dead. History says you should run. Stephen III of Moldavia said, "Hold my ale." But here's the kicker that makes this story absolutely mind-blowing. Stephen didn't just win, he annihilated them so completely that Ottoman chroniclers literally refused to record the full extent of their defeat. When your enemies are too embarrassed to write about how badly you crushed them, you've achieved something legendary? The man who dared defy an empire, Stephen the Great, wasn't supposed to be a military genius. Born into the chaotic world of 15th century Eastern Europe, where princes changed allegiances like fashion accessories and survival meant playing all sides, he seemed destined for obscurity. But here's what makes him fascinating. While other rulers were busy kissing Ottoman boots and paying tribute, Stephen was quietly building something the Turks had never faced before: a unified, disciplined, and absolutely ruthless military machine. The viral hook here. Stephen had already defeated the Ottomans twice before Vaslui, but Sultan Mehmed II, the man who conquered Constantinople, the conqueror of conquerors, took this personally. He wasn't just sending an army, he was sending a message that would echo through history. Nobody defies the Ottoman Empire 3 times and lives. The Ottoman war machine, Europe's nightmare. To understand why Vaslui was so shocking, you need to grasp what Stephen was facing. The Ottoman army of 1475 wasn't just large, it was a technological and tactical marvel that had steamrolled through the Balkans like a medieval Death Star. The Janissaries alone were enough to make veteran generals wake up in cold sweats. These weren't conscripts or feudal levies. They were professional soldiers, taken as children, converted to Islam, and trained from childhood to be killing machines. They had firearms when most European armies were still arguing about whether guns were honorable. They had discipline when others had chaos. They had a tactical flexibility that allowed them to adapt to any battlefield situation. And here's the terrifying part. The Janissaries were just the elite corps. The rest of the Ottoman force included seasoned Spahis cavalry, Wallachian auxiliaries, who knew the local terrain, and artillery that had breached the walls of Constantinople itself. And the second had personally overseen the assembly of this army. This wasn't just about conquest. It was about making an example that would terrify Europe into submission. The genius strategy that changed everything. Stephen's battle plan reads like something from a modern military thriller. But it was executed with medieval weapons and Renaissance cunning. Here's the detail that will blow your mind. Stephen deliberately retreated for 3 days, letting the Ottomans think he was scared while secretly leading them into a carefully prepared killing field. The location? The forests and marshes near Vaslui, where Ottoman numerical superiority would mean nothing and their cavalry would become sitting ducks. But Stephen's masterstroke wasn't the terrain, it was psychological warfare that would make Sun Tzu proud. He spread false information about his army's size, deliberately showed weakness where he was strong, and even accidentally let Ottoman spies discover fake battle plans. When the two armies finally met, the Ottomans weren't fighting the battle they had prepared for. They were walking into a trap 3 years in the making. The most chilling detail? Stephen had studied every major Ottoman victory of the previous 50 years. He knew their tactics better than some of their own generals. While they saw him as a barbarian prince, he was conducting a masterclass in asymmetric warfare the day the invincible army died. January 10, 1475, dawn breaks over the Vaslui plain. The Ottoman army deploys in their traditional formation, a sight that had struck terror into enemies from Vienna to Baghdad. The center holds the Janissaries. The wings extend with cavalry in behind them. The artillery waits to rain death on any opposition. Stephen's army appears on the opposite hill, and Ottoman commanders probably smiled. The Moldavian force looked exactly as expected: smaller, less disciplined, clearly inferior. What they couldn't see were the thousands of stakes hidden in the snow, the carefully dug pits, and the positioned archers who had been waiting in concealment since before dawn. Then the impossible happened. The Ottoman charge, which had broken armies from Hungary to Anatolia, shattered against prepared positions like waves against a cliff. The famous cavalry found themselves impaled on hidden stakes or trapped in marshland that Stephen's men knew like their own gardens. The Janissaries, advancing in perfect formation, walked straight into crossfire from multiple directions. But here's the detail that makes this battle legendary. When the Ottoman lines finally broke, Stephen didn't just pursue, he unleashed a slaughter so complete that it entered Ottoman nightmares for generations. Bodies covered the battlefield for miles. The Sultan's personal standard was captured. Entire elite units simply ceased to exist. Numbers don't lie, but they do shock. The casualties tell a story that seems impossible. Ottoman losses numbered between 40,000 to 45,000 men. Stephen's, less than 1,000. Let that sink in. This wasn't just a victory. It was military annihilation on a scale that modern historians still struggle to explain. For comparison, the famous Battle of Agincourt saw the English kill about 6,000 French, while losing only a few. And that's considered one of history's most lopsided victories. Vaslui makes Agincourt look like a fair fight. The psychological impact was even more devastating. News of the defeat sent shockwaves through the Ottoman Empire. Provinces that had been conquered decades earlier began to stir with rebellion. The Sultan himself reportedly fell into such a depression that court chroniclers worried for his sanity. The aftermath. When eagles fear ravens, Sultan Mehmed II never personally campaigned against Moldavia again. The man who had conquered the last remnant of the Byzantine Empire, who had made Europe tremble at the mention of his name, refused to face Stephen the Great in open battle for the rest of his life. The most viral part of this story? European courts that had ignored Stephen for decades suddenly began treating him like a celebrity. Pope Sixtus IV declared him Athleta Christi, Champion of Christ. Venice sent ambassadors. Even the Holy Roman Emperor, who usually treated Eastern European princes like poor relatives, began writing respectful letters. But Stephen wasn't done. Over the next decade, he would win 46 out of 48 battles, creating a military legacy that made him the most successful commander of his era, more successful than any contemporary Ottoman, Hungarian, or Polish general. The legacy that history almost forgot. Here's the tragedy. Stephen the Great should be as famous as Alexander or Napoleon, but he ruled a small principality in a region that Western Europe preferred to ignore. His tactical innovations influenced military thinking for centuries, but because he wasn't French or English or German, his name faded from popular history. The Battle of Vaslui proved something revolutionary. Superior numbers, better equipment, and fearsome reputation meant nothing against superior strategy. Perfect preparation and unshakable will. It was a lesson in asymmetric warfare that wouldn't be fully understood until centuries later. Stephen the Great died peacefully in 1504, having transformed a backwater principality into a regional power that survived for another 3 centuries. But his greatest achievement was unpoliticalite, was proving that the invincible Ottoman war machine could bleed, could break, and could be beaten by someone who understood that the greatest weapon isn't the sword in your hand, but the strategy in your mind. The Battle of Vaslui stands as history's ultimate underdog victory, a reminder that sometimes, just sometimes, David doesn't need luck to beat Goliath. He just needs to be smarter, braver, and willing to do what everyone else thinks is impossible. And in the snow-covered fields of Moldavia, one winter day in 1475, impossible became inevitable.